Hey, welcome back to Civics. And here in episode 9, we're going to be talking about the Bill of Rights, which are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution and what they bring to the table. Before we start talking about what the individual amendments are, though, we need to talk why the Bill of Rights even happened. So, like I said in the last episode, there's this ginormous fight over whether we should ratify the Constitution. And so, one of the compromises that the pro-ratifiers, or the Federalists, made was that once the government was established, one of the first things the government would do is pass a list of amendments that would explicitly state some of the rights for citizens. Because in the Constitution, you don't see any like specifically listed rights for citizens. It's all about how the government works. So the Bill of Rights is really codifying rights that the people who didn't want it to be ratified thought needed to be in writing in the Constitution to ensure that they were never infringed upon. So this was all kind of part of the compromise that allowed the Constitution to be ratified, is this Bill of Rights. So let's get started. Let's talk about each one individually. The First Amendment is kind of a catch-all. It has multiple things in it, but here are the main parts. One, it says freedom of religion. So that means you are able to celebrate and practice your religion freely. Nobody can tell you that you can't practice your religion. That's it's unconstitutional for them to do that, right? So like if you're Muslim or Jewish or Buddhist or anything, right, you have the right to practice your religion. Now, oftentimes nowadays, this religion is used to say, well, we have freedom of religion, and my religion says that other people shouldn't be allowed to do this, so we shouldn't allow. I can tell people that they can't do that. And that's not what this is saying. It's saying that you can practice your religion, but it also means that you can't impose your religious beliefs on other people. The government can't do that. So that's part of the First Amendment. Another part of the First Amendment is a freedom of speech, which means that you're allowed to say and do whatever you want, right? You can't be punished for speaking your mind. At least that's the goal of the amendment. Now, over time, that has changed. So there are now some types of speech that are limited. For instance, hate speech is limited. You're not allowed to say certain hateful things anymore, right? You can't be anti-Semitic. You shouldn't be able to be racist. That kind of thing, not okay. Another type of speech that has been limited is speech that endangers others. So, for instance, if you're in like a crowded theater and you yell fire, right, and people panic and scream and run around and people get hurt, you can be punished for that. And you can say, I have freedom of speech, but that freedom of speech hurt or even killed people. And so the Supreme Court has said that that's not protected anymore. So you can't use free speech to physically harm other people. So that's something that's changed over the last 200 years of our country. The next part of the First Amendment is the freedom of the press. So that basically means that the press is allowed to do their job. Newspapers can go and report, and television studios can report on whatever's going on, and the government can't stop them from doing that. Now, obviously, there are situations where the government might not want the press to be involved in something. So, like if something of like really high security, or I know like school districts have like closed sessions where like the media can't be around. That's because they're talking about sensitive material that isn't supposed to be out around in the public. And so that kind of stuff is okay. But for example, in the recent protests that have been happening around the country where police officers have been shooting rubber bullets at journalists, that would be an infringement of the First Amendment, because you're now saying that the press can't do their jobs. And then the final part of the First Amendment is the freedom to assemble. So that means people can't be punished for assembling to like lawfully protest or to get together at like church gatherings or stuff like that. You're not supposed to be allowed to do that. Now, once again, the scope of the First Amendment is not all encompassing. It doesn't mean that the government can't stop you if there's like a health concern, right? Because COVID's going on right now, so you're not supposed to meet in big groups. The government can limit that, right, for your safety. The government now you have to have like a permit to protest. And some people think that that's not okay. Some people do. But really, it's just the government making sure that they're aware of what you're doing and that they can protect you if you are protesting, right? So they know that you're there. So that's all part of the First Amendment. So the First Amendment is all about freedoms, really. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of assembly. Number 2 has been really controversial lately, and that's the right to a well-regulated militia and to bear arms. Now, this one has been, we talk about this one all the time, especially with all of the gun violence that's happening in our country, right? Should people be allowed to have weapons that are meant for military personnel and not for every ordinary people? Some people think that, the amendment very strictly says I have the right to bear arms, and that means I can have whatever gun I want, whether it's automatic, whether it's, whatever. I have the right to that. You can't stop me. Other people have interpreted it differently. They think, well, now hold on a second. When this amendment was written, we were using muskets, and muskets aren't nearly as dangerous as an AR-15. Maybe we should limit the extent to which you're allowed to bear arms. And that's kind of been a really big conversation and argument in our country lately is over this. The well-regulated militia part, well, our well-regulated militia is the National Guard. So if you want to join a well-regulated militia and have a weapon that way, join the National Guard. 3, it says no soldier will forcibly be quartered in your home. That's not really an issue anymore. The government doesn't try to put soldiers in people's homes. This was really put in there because the British were doing that when they were occupying our territory. So when the Revolutionary War was coming to a start, they were placing British soldiers in people's homes, and they weren't necessarily paying them back for all the things they destroyed or ate or whatever. And so they wanted to make sure that couldn't happen again. So that's the Third Amendment. Very important. The fourth one, no unlawful search and seizures. And that's why we need warrants for the police to search your property, because the Fourth Amendment says that the police can't just search you willy-nilly. They have to have a reason. And that's true to this day. If they don't have a warrant, then all the evidence that they gather from you is considered null, even if it's evidence that would convict you of a crime. It doesn't count because they didn't have a search warrant. Or probable cause. That's a new caveat to it too. They can have probable cause. So if they think based on your actions that you might be breaking the law, right? If they see you breaking into a vehicle, they can search you. If they see you breaking the law, that's probable cause. Or if they hear like gunshots, they then have probable cause to enter a building. So that's changed a little bit. 5 has a lot of different things in it, but the two major ones are, 1, double jeopardy. And double jeopardy means that you can't be tried for the same crime more than once. So let's say that you're on trial for murder and you're not convicted. They can't try you again for that same murder. So let's say they find new evidence after the trial's over. They can't try you for it anymore. They have to try you for a different crime. 2, part of the Fifth Amendment, you don't have to speak ill of yourself in court. So if you're in court and you're on the witness stand and you don't want to answer a question because it might incriminate you, you don't have to. So they can't force you to answer any questions they ask you. The 6th one is that you're guaranteed a speedy and public trial when you break the law, or allegedly break the law. Nowadays, this is becoming more and more of a challenge for our judicial system. We're starting to hit the point where we don't have enough judges, we don't have enough courts to guarantee a speedy and public trial. Sometimes trials take years to start. And there's a lot of judicial advocates that say that's not okay because it's not speedy. So they're trying to find ways to make it so that this process is faster, so that we're guaranteeing the rights established in the Constitution. 7, you are required to have a trial by jury unless you choose not to. So sometimes defendants can say, I don't want to have a jury, and that's their right, but you are allowed to have one. And so you will have a jury in all trials. It says under $20. That part doesn't really matter anymore. Nobody's going to sue you over $20 anyway. 8th Amendment, you can't have cruel and unusual punishments. And that's been used to strike down different types of the death penalty in America. For instance, back in like the Old West, they used to hang people. In most states now, that's being considered cruel and unusual, so you can't be hung anymore for your crimes. So states that do have the death penalty, they have to use means to kill you that is not cruel or unusual. And so up until very recently, that was lethal injection. And now we're starting to find that lethal injection doesn't always work. And it's not always, it is sometimes cruel and unusual. And so now there's some doubt onto whether or not we should be using that method either. And people are arguing that we shouldn't be using the death penalty at all. So that's another major talk in our American public discourse, is whether the death penalty should be legal at all. Some states think so, some people don't. 9. 9 basically says that there are rights that are not expressly written in the Constitution. So basically what it says is, look, we made this list of 10 rights that we think should be guaranteed by the Constitution, but clearly we missed things, and things are going to change. And so there are other rights that we think should be guaranteed, but we couldn't think of them yet. So we're saying that they do exist, and we're writing it in here so that you know. This amendment isn't used very often in constitutional law, but when it is, it does usually get used to justify really large cases. So, for example, Roe versus Wade was justified using the Ninth Amendment, saying that there is a right to being able to make a medical decision on your own. And so usually it's cases like that where the Ninth Amendment is used to justify changing the law. And then finally, the 10th Amendment basically says that anything that's not specifically given to the federal government, written in the Constitution, is granted to the states. So in that case, right, remember in the first article, in the second and the third, they gave a list of things that the federal government is allowed to do. And basically they're saying that if it's not listed in those things, it's not the federal government's business. The states have the right to do all those things. And that's why the state government has such a large role in all sorts of different public affairs. So for instance, the states are the ones who regulate a lot of the education in their states, because and that's why each state is different in those regards, because the government doesn't have the right to regulate education. It's not explicitly written in the Constitution. Or each state has slightly different laws about driving, or this or that or the other thing. And that's because they're not explicitly stated in the Constitution, so the states have the right to do things about that. So those are the first 10 amendments, and they were passed pretty quickly after the new government was formed. In our next episode, we're going to talk about the rest of the amendments. We now have 26, so there's 16 more to go, and we'll talk about each one of those and what they do and why they're important. So can't wait to see you next time when we talk about some more amendments and all the good things that those have done for our country. Thanks again. See you later.